Kim Tae-ho walked through the long corridors of the Galactic Council building for what he knew would be the last time. His footsteps echoed against the crystal walls that stretched high above him. The building was designed to make visitors feel small, and the aliens who built it had succeeded. For 150 years, humans had walked these halls as junior members of the great galactic community. Today, that would end. The council chamber opened before him like the mouth of some great beast. 12 different species sat in their assigned seats arranged in a perfect circle. The Velthari occupied the highest platform with their long necks, stretched upward in a display of superiority. Below them sat the insectoid Crixtal, with their compound eyes reflecting the chamber lights. Each species had their place in the hierarchy, and humans had always been at the bottom. Tae-ho took his position at the small podium reserved for junior members. The speaking platform was deliberately lower than all the others. He had stood here many times before making requests that were ignored or dismissed. Today would be different because today he would not be making any requests. Council Speaker Velthari looked down at him with the same expression of bored irritation that had greeted human representatives for decades. The tall alien's skin shimmered with patterns that indicated mild annoyance. They did not like having their time wasted by inferior species. Human Representative Kim Tae-ho, the speaker said in their melodic but cold voice, "You have requested this emergency session. State your business quickly as we have important matters to discuss." Tae-ho nodded politely. He had learned long ago that showing anger or frustration only made the aliens dismiss human concerns more quickly. His calm demeanor had served him well in his years as ambassador, but it had never earned him the respect he sought for his people. Honored Council. He began using the formal address that was required. "I come before you today to make one final request for equal representation for humanity within this governing body. We have served faithfully for 150 years. We have fought in your wars. We have built your stations. We have solved problems that others could not solve. We ask only for the same voice in decisions that affect all of us." A sound like grinding metal came from the Korthax delegation. It was their version of laughter. Several other species made similar noises of amusement. The Velthari speaker's skin patterns shifted to show what humans had learned was contempt. Human Tai-ho. The speaker replied, "This matter has been discussed many times. Humanity lacks the wisdom and experience necessary for full council membership. Your species is young and impulsive. You contribute labor and basic services, which we appreciate, but governance requires a deeper understanding of galactic affairs. Perhaps in another few centuries we will reconsider this request." The dismissal was complete and final. No discussion would be allowed. No debate would be entertained. Tae-ho had expected this response, but hearing it still stung. He thought of Park So-min back on the human colonies working 18-hour days to coordinate supply chains that kept half the galaxy fed. He thought of Lee Jae-wook commanding human ships that patrolled the dangerous outer systems while alien vessels stayed safe near their homeworlds. He thought of the thousands of human engineers and technicians who kept alien technology running when its creators could not understand their own machines. "I understand," Tae-ho said simply. "Thank you for your time and consideration." He turned and walked toward the exit. Behind him, he could hear the aliens already moving on to other business. The human request had taken less than 5 minutes to reject. 50 years of preparation and hope dismissed in the time it took most species to order lunch. Crixtal caught his eye as he reached the chamber door. The insectoid alien's head tilted slightly in what humans had learned was a gesture of respect among their kind. It was a small kindness in a room full of casual cruelty. Tai-ho nodded back and stepped into the corridor. His personal communicator activated as soon as he left the chamber. Park So-min's voice came through clearly, despite the distance between them. "How did it go?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "As expected," Tae-ho replied. "Begin Operation Quiet Exit." Those 3 words would change everything. Across human space, the message spread through secure channels that had been prepared for this moment. In mining colonies on the outer rim, human supervisors quietly began transferring control of operations to alien understudies. On massive space stations, human engineers started uploading their maintenance logs to central databases and packing their personal belongings. In research facilities, human scientists carefully documented their ongoing projects and prepared transition reports. The evacuation had been planned for months. Every human in Council space had received detailed instructions on how to leave their posts without causing immediate crises. They would finish their current shifts. They would brief their replacements. They would pack efficiently and depart quietly. No protests, no demonstrations, no demands for better treatment. They would simply go home. Park So-min coordinated the massive operation from her office on New Seoul. Transport ships that had been positioned throughout Council space began moving toward human colonies and stations. The aliens noticed the increased shipping traffic but assumed it was routine supply runs. They paid little attention to human movements. On Kepler Station, Choi Min-ho finished his final maintenance report and uploaded it to the central system. For 20 years, he had kept the station's power grid running smoothly. The alien engineers who worked under him were competent, but they had never learned the subtle adjustments that prevented cascade failures. They would learn soon enough. Yoon Da-yoon walked through the agricultural domes on Centauri Colony one last time. The crops looked healthy and green under the artificial suns. She had spent decades solving soil problems and pest issues that the original colonists never knew existed. Her replacement was a Velthari scientist who had impressive credentials but no practical experience with alien soil conditions. Kang Woo-jin shut down his workstation in the translation center and packed his research into secure containers. The communication protocols he had developed allowed 12 different species to understand each other, despite vast differences in language structure and cultural meaning. The system worked so well that most aliens had forgotten how difficult cross-species communication had been before humans arrived. The exodus continued for 3 days. Human families loaded their belongings onto transport ships and said goodbye to alien neighbors who seemed confused by the sudden departures. Some aliens asked why the humans were leaving. The humans smiled politely and said they had been called home for reassignment. It was not technically a lie. News of the mass departure reached the council on the 3rd day. Speaker Velthari received the report with satisfaction rather than concern. The troublesome humans were removing themselves from council space. This would solve many problems. No more requests for equal treatment. No more human representatives asking uncomfortable questions during council sessions. No more need to pretend that an inferior species deserved respect. Excellent, the speaker told their aide. This will improve efficiency throughout our territories. Humans were always too emotional and unpredictable for proper governance. We are better off without them. The aide made a note to inform department heads that human positions would need to be filled by more suitable species. It should not be difficult. How hard could it be to replace manual laborers and basic technicians? By the end of the week, 90% of humans had left council space. The remaining 10% were either in transit or handling final transfer procedures. Space stations and colonies reported minor disruptions but nothing that seemed serious. A few systems showed warning indicators, but alien engineers assumed these were temporary glitches that would resolve themselves. Tae-ho stood on the observation deck of the transport ship that carried him away from council space. Behind them, the great spiral of the galaxy continued its ancient rotation. Somewhere in that vast collection of stars, aliens were discovering that running a galactic civilization was more complicated than they had believed. "Do you think they will ask us to come back?" his aide asked. Tae-ho smiled for the first time in months. "They will ask. The question is whether we will listen." 3 weeks after the last human transport ship disappeared into hyperspace, the first major system failure struck Kepler Station. The massive trading hub that served as a crossroads for 6 different shipping lanes suddenly found itself in the dark. Station Commander Zixtal of the Velthari received the emergency alert at what humans would have called 3 in the morning. The primary power grid had suffered a cascade failure that knocked out life support to 3 entire sections. Emergency backup systems were struggling to maintain minimal power to the rest of the station. "How is this possible?" Zixtal demanded as they rushed to the command center. "The power grid was just inspected last month." Chief Engineer Colrex checked the maintenance logs with increasing confusion. "Sir, the last full inspection was performed by human Choi Min-ho 18 days ago. He reported all systems functioning within normal parameters. There is no indication of any problems. Zixtal's skin showed the mottled pattern that indicated frustration. Then why are we losing power? Where is Choi Min-ho? Get him down here. Immediately, sir, Kolrex said quietly. Choi Min-ho left the station 2 weeks ago. He was part of the human departure. I am now the senior power systems engineer. The implications of this statement hit Zixtal like a physical blow. Choi Min-ho had been responsible for power systems maintenance for over 20 years. Every other engineer on the station had learned their job by working under human supervision. They knew how to follow procedures and fix obvious problems, but they had never needed to understand the deeper complexities of the system. What about the backup systems? Zixtal asked. Surely you can activate those. Kolrex manipulated the control interface with increasing desperation. Warning lights flashed across multiple displays as more systems showed signs of failure. Sir, I am trying, but the backup activation sequence requires authorization codes that were changed last month. Choi Min-ho implemented a new security protocol, but the documentation is not in our database. On the agricultural colony of Centauri Prime, similar problems were developing. The crops in the main growing domes had begun, showing signs of stress that baffled the Velthari scientists who had taken over from human agricultural specialists. What had seemed like simple farming was revealing layers of complexity that no one had anticipated. Dr. Velnara examined the yellowing leaves of the protein-rich grain that fed millions throughout the sector. The plants had been thriving under human care, but 3 weeks of alien management had produced a crisis that threatened the entire harvest. The soil composition readings are within acceptable parameters, Dr. Velnara told her research team. The nutrient levels appear adequate. The irrigation system is functioning normally. I cannot determine why the crops are failing. Her assistant pointed to a section of the dome where the plant deterioration was most severe. Doctor, perhaps there is a pest infestation. The humans mentioned pest control in their transition notes. Dr. Velnara activated a detailed scanner and directed it toward the affected plants. The results showed the presence of microscopic organisms that were slowly destroying the root systems. The creatures were so small that they had not appeared on routine scans. How did the humans deal with these organisms? She asked. The assistant consulted the files that Yoon Da-un had left behind. The records indicate a complex rotation of biological agents that must be applied in precise timing with the growth cycles. The human specialist apparently developed this system over many years of trial and error. Dr. Velnara studied the documentation with growing alarm. The pest control system required intimate knowledge of dozens of different biological cycles. It involved timing applications down to specific hours of the day based on temperature and humidity variations that changed with the seasons. The humans had made it look simple, but the underlying science was incredibly sophisticated. How long will it take us to implement this system? She asked. Based on the complexity of the protocols, her assistant replied, perhaps 6 months to fully understand the process. However, the current crop will be dead within 2 weeks if we cannot begin treatment immediately. The crisis was spreading beyond individual stations and colonies. Throughout Council space systems that had run smoothly for decades began showing signs of strain. The problems seemed unrelated at first, but a pattern was emerging that terrified those who recognized it. In the Great Communication Center on the Council, Homeworld translator Prime Krikstal noticed the first signs of linguistic drift. The universal translation matrix that allowed different species to communicate had begun producing subtle errors in meaning. Conversations between species were becoming confused as cultural nuances were lost in translation. The translation accuracy has decreased by 12% in the past week, Krikstal reported to the Communication Council. We are seeing increasing incidents of misunderstanding between species due to imprecise translations. Council member Thexal dismissed the concern with a gesture of irritation. 12% is within acceptable parameters. These are minor technical issues that will resolve themselves as the system adapts. Krikstal was not convinced. They had worked closely with human linguist Kang Woo-jin for many years and understood how delicate the translation protocols really were. The system did not simply convert words from one language to another. It analyzed cultural context and emotional subtext to convey true meaning across species barriers. With respect, Council member, the translation matrix requires constant adjustment to prevent drift. Human linguists have been updating the protocols daily for decades. Without those updates, the system will gradually lose accuracy until communication becomes impossible. The warning was ignored. Council member Thexal had more important concerns than minor translation errors. The humans were gone, and that was what mattered. Technical problems could be solved by superior alien intellect. Similar conversations were taking place throughout Council space as alien administrators discovered the true extent of human involvement in their civilization. What had seemed like simple support roles were revealed to be critical system functions that required specialized knowledge and experience. The first formal complaint reached the Council chambers exactly 21 days after the human departure. Station Commander Zixtel transmitted an emergency request for immediate assistance with power grid failures that threatened the survival of everyone on Kepler Station. Speaker Velthari received the report with annoyance rather than concern. This is clearly a maintenance issue that should be handled at the local level. Why are we being bothered with such trivial matters? Honored Speaker. Zixtel replied through the communication link. We have attempted every standard repair procedure. The power grid uses human-designed backup systems that we cannot access. Without immediate technical assistance, the station will lose life support within 48 hours. The implications began to penetrate the speaker's consciousness. If Kepler Station failed, it would disrupt shipping throughout the sector. The economic consequences would be severe. More importantly, it would make the Council look incompetent. Contact the human representatives immediately, the speaker ordered. Inform them that their technical specialists must return to resolve this crisis. The message was transmitted to human space within the hour. The response came back with surprising speed. Former Ambassador Kim Tae-ho replied personally to the Council's demand. The Galactic Council has made it clear that humans are not qualified for positions of responsibility within Council space. We respect this decision and have removed our unqualified personnel as requested. We wish the Council success in resolving their technical difficulties. The response was polite and professional. It was also completely unhelpful. The humans were not refusing to help. They were simply pointing out that help had been deemed unnecessary by the Council itself. Speaker Velthari read the message 3 times before the full meaning became clear. The humans were using the Council's own words against them. If humans were truly unqualified, then their assistance should not be needed. If their assistance was needed, then perhaps they had been more qualified than anyone had realized. Send another message, the speaker commanded. Offer to hire human technical consultants on a temporary basis to resolve these issues. The second response came even faster than the first. A simple price quote for consulting services that made the speaker's skin turn colors that indicated shock. The humans were asking for compensation rates normally reserved for senior council advisors. The cost would be astronomical. This is extortion, the speaker declared. They are taking advantage of temporary difficulties to demand unreasonable payment. But the problems were not temporary, and they were getting worse. Reports flooded in from across Council space as more systems failed and more colonies faced crisis. The humans had been so thoroughly integrated into galactic civilization that their absence was like removing a vital organ from a living body. The Council faced a choice they had never imagined. They could pay the enormous consulting fees and admit that humans were indeed qualified experts. Or they could solve the problems themselves and prove that alien superiority was real rather than imagined. Pride won over practicality. The Council chose to fix the problems without human help. It was a decision that would cost them everything. The crisis deepened as the true scope of human integration became impossible to ignore. What had started as isolated technical problems was spreading through Council space like a plague that infected every aspect of galactic civilization. Admiral Corthex of the Council Defense Fleet discovered the extent of the military crisis during what should have been a routine patrol sweep. His flagship, the Dominator, had been equipped with the most advanced tactical systems in the galaxy. Human engineers had upgraded the ship's artificial intelligence to adapt to new combat scenarios in real time. The system had made the Council fleet nearly invincible in recent conflicts. Now that same system was failing at the worst possible moment. Long-range sensors had detected a fleet of Ravager ships moving toward the border colonies. The Ravagers were an aggressive species that had been held in check by Council military superiority for decades. They seemed to sense that something had changed. Tactical analysis Admiral Cortex commanded as the enemy ships appeared on the main display. The ship's artificial intelligence processed the sensor data for several minutes before responding. Enemy fleet composition includes vessel types not in current tactical database. Recommended response protocols are unavailable. Manual targeting required. Cortex felt a chill run through his exoskeleton. The tactical AI had never failed to provide instant analysis and response recommendations. Human programmer Oh Hae-jin had designed the system to learn from every encounter and develop new strategies automatically. Without human oversight, the system was reverting to basic programming that could not handle unexpected situations. Override the AI and implement standard attack formation, he ordered. His weapons officer manipulated the controls with increasing frustration. Sir, the override codes were changed last month as part of a security update. The human technical staff implemented new protocols but did not transfer the codes to our systems. The implications were staggering. The most powerful warships in the galaxy were helpless against enemies they had easily defeated in the past. Worse yet, the defense grid protecting Council worlds was experiencing similar problems. On the planet Velthari Prime, the orbital defense platforms that protected the Council, Homeworld began showing critical vulnerabilities. Chief Defense Coordinator Melthar watched in horror as simulation after simulation revealed gaps in the protective shield that had never existed before. How is this possible? Melthar demanded. These defense platforms have protected our world for centuries. Defense technician Palrex consulted the maintenance logs with visible confusion. Coordinator, the platforms themselves are functioning normally. However, the integration protocols that coordinate their defensive coverage have been modified dozens of times over the past 50 years. All modifications were performed by human engineers. Melthar examined the technical readouts that showed the defensive grid coverage. What had appeared to be a solid protective barrier was actually a complex web of overlapping fields that required precise timing and coordination. Human engineers had been constantly adjusting the system to account for orbital mechanics and energy, fluctuations that varied throughout the year. Can we restore the original configuration? Melthar asked. Sir, the original configuration was designed for a much simpler threat environment, Palrex replied. Modern weapons would easily penetrate the old defensive patterns. The human modifications were necessary to maintain security against current threats. The defense coordinator realized that they faced an impossible choice. They could not return to the old defensive configuration without exposing the planet to attack, but they could not maintain the current configuration without human expertise that was no longer available. Similar discoveries were being made throughout Council space, as alien officials learned that human contributions went far deeper than anyone had realized. The translation crisis was spreading as communication errors multiplied and species began to distrust each other due to misunderstandings. On the trading world of Nexus Station, a simple contract dispute between Velthari merchants and Crixtal suppliers had escalated into a diplomatic incident due to translation errors. The automated translation system had converted a polite request for payment extension into what appeared to be an insulting demand for tribute. Station Administrator Velkanos tried desperately to resolve the misunderstanding before it damaged trade relationships that had existed for decades. Both parties must understand that this is a technical malfunction. The translation system is experiencing temporary difficulties. The Crixtal delegation leader Ziktar was not convinced. Administrator, these humans designed the translation protocols. How convenient that their departure coincides with translations that favor Velthari interests. Perhaps this is not a malfunction but sabotage. The accusation sent shockwaves through the diplomatic community. If humans had deliberately sabotaged the translation system, then every communication since their departure could be suspect. Trade agreements could be invalid. Treaties might be meaningless. The foundation of galactic civilization rested on the ability of different species to communicate honestly with each other. Velkanos knew that Ziktar was wrong. The humans had left extensive documentation and had trained alien replacements to the best of their ability. The system failures were not sabotage, but the inevitable result of losing the expertise needed to maintain complex technology. But explaining this would require admitting that humans had been essential to Council operations rather than merely useful. Such an admission would undermine the fundamental assumptions that justified alien superiority and human exclusion from decision-making. The crisis reached a new level when former human diplomat Nam Seok Jin made an unexpected appearance at Council headquarters. He had not come as a supplicant seeking readmission to Council space. Instead, he arrived as the representative of something new and potentially threatening. "I bring greetings from the Independent Human Alliance," Nam Seok Jin announced to the emergency council session that had been called to address the mounting crises. "We have received requests for technical assistance from various council members. We are prepared to provide consulting services at standard galactic rates." Speaker Velthari examined the formal proposal that Nam Seok Jin presented. The document was professionally prepared and completely legal under galactic trade law. It offered human expertise at prices that were reasonable for senior technical consultants, but astronomical compared to what humans had been paid as council employees. "This is extortion," the speaker declared. "You are taking advantage of temporary technical difficulties to demand excessive compensation." Nam Seok Jin smiled politely. "With respect, honored speaker, we are simply offering our services at market rates. If council expertise is sufficient to resolve these issues, then our assistance is unnecessary. If our assistance is required, then surely it deserves fair compensation." The logic was unassailable, but the costs were staggering. Hiring human consultants at the proposed rates would cost more than the council's entire annual budget for technical services. It would also represent a public admission that humans possessed expertise that justified such compensation. "We decline your offer," Speaker Velthari announced. "The Council possesses the technical knowledge necessary to resolve these minor difficulties. We do not require assistance from inferior species." Nam Seok Jin nodded respectfully. "As you wish. Honored Speaker, please note that this offer expires in 30 days due to increasing demand for our services from other clients. Good day." He left the council chambers with the same quiet dignity that Ambassador Kim Tae-ho had shown weeks earlier. Behind him, the council faced a mounting disaster that was spreading beyond their ability to control. Reports continued to flood in from across council space. The agricultural crisis was threatening food supplies for billions. Power grid failures were cascading through major population centers. Military systems were failing when they were needed most. The translation breakdown was destroying diplomatic relationships that had taken centuries to build. Most terrifying of all was the growing realization that the humans had not sabotaged anything. They had simply removed their expertise from systems that required constant human oversight to function properly. What had seemed like alien technology was revealed to be human innovation grafted onto alien infrastructure. The Council had spent 150 years taking credit for human achievements while dismissing human capabilities. Now they faced the consequences of their own arrogance as the civilization they thought they controlled crumbled around them. Speaker Velthari stared at the crisis reports that covered their desk and wondered if pride was worth the price they were about to pay. Outside the council chambers, the greatest galactic civilization in history was collapsing one system failure at a time. The humans were gone, but their absence spoke louder than their presence ever had. In trying to prove they did not need human help, the council was about to discover exactly how much they had always depended on the species they had dismissed as inferior. Speaker Velthari stood before the massive control console that represented the pinnacle of council technology. The Central Systems Array controlled infrastructure across 36 star systems and had been the crown jewel of galactic engineering for over 2 centuries. Today it would prove that alien superiority was not a myth. "Initiate the Purge Protocol," the speaker commanded, with a voice that carried absolute authority. Chief Systems Engineer Drakvin hesitated at the control interface. "Honored Speaker, are you certain this is wise? The human-designed subsystems are deeply integrated throughout our networks. Removing them all simultaneously could cause unpredictable interactions." The speaker's skin displayed the angry red patterns that indicated final decision. "Engineer Drakvin, for too long we have allowed inferior human technology to contaminate our superior systems. Today, we prove that we never needed their primitive contributions. Activate the protocol immediately." Drakvin had spent months preparing for this moment under direct orders from the council leadership. The Purge Protocol was designed to identify and remove every piece of human-developed code from council systems and replace it with pure alien alternatives. In theory, it would eliminate their dependence on human expertise once and for all. The engineer initiated the sequence with reluctance born of practical experience. Unlike the council leadership, Drakvan had worked directly with human engineers and understood the sophistication of their contributions. But orders were orders, and the council had made their decision. Protocol activation in progress, Drakvan announced as streams of data flowed across the monitoring displays. Estimated completion time is 6 hours. What happened next was not what anyone had expected. The protocol began its systematic sweep through council networks, but instead of simply removing human code, it revealed the true extent of human integration. Every system that had been touched by human engineers over the past century and a half was marked for purging. Lim Gite had designed the protocol himself during his final weeks as chief systems architect. He had understood that someday the council might try to erase human contributions entirely. The protocol was built to do exactly what they asked, but with one crucial modification. It would show them precisely what they were losing before it destroyed everything. The first casualties were the communication networks. The translation matrices that allowed different species to understand each other were revealed to be 90% human code. When the protocol removed these systems, the universal translator simply stopped working. Conversations between species became impossible as each alien tried to communicate in their native language. "What is happening?" Speaker Velthari demanded, but their words came out as untranslated, Velthari vocalizations that meant nothing to the other species in the control room. Drakvan tried to respond, but realized that the speaker could no longer understand his native language. The engineer switched to the emergency protocols and began using hand gestures to indicate that something was seriously wrong with the purge process. The cascade accelerated as more systems failed. Power grids that had been stabilized by human engineering began experiencing the cascade failures that human maintenance had prevented for decades. Life support systems reverted to their original alien configurations, which were inadequate for the mixed species populations that now inhabited council worlds. On Kepler Station, the crisis that had begun weeks earlier suddenly became exponentially worse. Station Commander Zixtal watched in horror as every system that had been repaired by human engineers over the years simultaneously failed. The backup power grid collapsed entirely. Emergency life support could only maintain atmosphere for a few hours. "Emergency evacuation protocols!" Zixtal shouted to a crew that could no longer understand the words being spoken. The evacuation itself became impossible as the docking bay control systems failed. Transport ships could not safely approach the station without the guidance systems that human engineers had refined over decades of operation. The station was dying, and its inhabitants were trapped aboard a technological corpse. Similar disasters were occurring throughout Council space as the Purge Protocol systematically dismantled the infrastructure that held galactic civilization together. What had seemed like alien achievements were revealed to be collaborative efforts where human innovation had become essential to basic functionality. The military crisis became catastrophic as warship systems failed across the entire Council fleet. Admiral Cortex found his flagship dead in space with life support failing and weapons offline. The Ravager fleet that had been approaching the border systems detected the sudden weakness and accelerated their attack. All ships report status. The Admiral tried to command, but his voice was transmitted as unintelligible Crixtal clicking, sounds that his crew could not understand. The tactical displays showed a nightmare scenario. Every major warship in the fleet was experiencing similar failures. The adaptive AI systems that had made them nearly invincible were gone. The coordination protocols that allowed fleet-wide tactical maneuvers were offline. The weapon systems that had kept enemy forces at bay for decades were reverting to their original programming and failing to engage targets effectively. The Ravager fleet struck the outer colonies with devastating force. Defense platforms that should have easily repelled the attack stood silent and helpless as their human-designed coordination systems lay in ruins. Millions of civilians faced death or enslavement because the Council had decided to prove they did not need human help. On the Council homeworld of Velthari Prime, the planetary defense grid suffered complete collapse. Chief Defense Coordinator Melthar watched the orbital platforms go offline one by one as the Purge Protocol removed the targeting systems that human engineers had spent decades perfecting. The irony was not lost on those who understood what was happening. In trying to prove their independence from human expertise, the Council had created the exact scenario that human psychologist Song Mi-young had predicted in her classified behavioral analysis reports. She had warned that alien pride would eventually lead to catastrophic decision-making if left unchecked. Those reports were now being read by human leaders who had prepared for exactly this outcome. Park So-min received real-time intelligence updates from monitoring stations that tracked Council communications. The humans had always known this day would come. Military response status, she asked Lee Jae-wook during an emergency conference. Call. All fleets are ready and positioned, the admiral replied. We can reach the affected systems within 12 hours if you give the order. Park So-min studied the tactical displays that showed the developing crisis across Council space. Billions of lives hung in the balance as infrastructure failed and enemy forces moved to exploit the chaos. The humans had the power to help, but they also had a choice to make. Implement Operation Rescue Protocol, she decided, but maintain our independence. We go as saviors, not as supplicants. The human fleets that had been quietly positioned outside Council space began moving toward the crisis zones. Their ships were equipped with independent systems that did not rely on Council infrastructure. Their crews had been trained to operate in exactly these conditions, but they were not returning as the junior partners who had been dismissed weeks earlier. They were coming back as equals who would dictate the terms of any future relationship. Speaker Velthari stood in the ruins of the Council Control Center, watching displays that showed the collapse of everything they had built. The Purge Protocol had accomplished its goal of removing human contamination from their systems. Unfortunately, it had also removed the expertise that made those systems functional. The wrong switch had been pressed not because of malice or sabotage, but because of pride and ignorance. In trying to prove they were superior to humans, the Council had proven the opposite. Now they would learn whether the species they had dismissed as inferior would be merciful enough to save them from their own arrogance. Emergency signals flooded in from across. Council space, as the civilization that had ruled the galaxy for 3 millennia, collapsed in the span of a single day. The humans were coming, but whether they came as rescuers or conquerors remained to be seen. Lee Jae-wook stood on the bridge of the Human Alliance flagship, watching the tactical display that showed the catastrophe unfolding across Council space. His fleet had been waiting outside the boundaries of former Council territory for this exact moment. The question now was not whether to intervene, but how to intervene in a way that would create lasting change. Admiral, we are receiving emergency distress calls from 17 different star systems, his communications officer reported. Power grid failures on Kepler Station. Life support collapse on Centauri Colony. Military systems offline throughout. The Velthari sector. The Ravager fleet is attacking defenseless colonies. Jae-wook studied the reports with the calm professionalism that had made him one of humanity's most respected military leaders. The Council had created this crisis through their own arrogance, but millions of innocent civilians were paying the price. Alien civilians who had never voted to exclude humans from decision-making and who deserved protection regardless of their government's failures. Begin rescue operations immediately, he ordered. Priority goes to civilian evacuation and humanitarian aid. Military assistance is secondary unless civilian lives are directly threatened. The human fleet split into smaller task forces that moved with practiced efficiency toward the crisis zones. These ships had been designed and built during the years when humans knew this day would come. They carried independent life support systems that could sustain entire populations. Their medical facilities were equipped to treat multiple alien species. Their engineering teams understood both human and alien technology. Most importantly, their crews had been trained to operate as liberators rather than conquerors. The humans were not coming to rule over the aliens who had dismissed them. They were coming to demonstrate that cooperation was stronger than domination. On Kepler Station, Commander Zixtal felt the deck shudder beneath his feet as the station's structural integrity began to fail. The cascade power failure had triggered secondary failures throughout the massive facility. Emergency life support could only maintain atmosphere for another few hours, and evacuation seemed impossible with the docking systems offline. Then the sensors detected something unexpected. A fleet of ships was approaching the station, but they were not the alien rescue vessels that Zixtal had hoped for. These were human ships with design signatures that were familiar yet somehow different, larger than the ships that had left weeks earlier. more advanced, more capable. Kepler Station. This is Admiral Lee J. Wook of the Human Alliance vessel New Seoul. We are here to provide emergency assistance. Please prepare your population for immediate evacuation. The voice came through clearly despite the communication. System failures that had made contact with Council vessels impossible. Somehow, the human ships were still able to connect with station systems that alien engineers could no longer access. Zixtal felt a complex mixture of relief and humiliation. The humans whose expertise had been dismissed as unnecessary were now the only hope for survival. They were offering help without conditions or demands for apology. Professional assistance from people who had every right to leave the station to its fate. Admiral J. Wook, this is Station Commander Zixtal. We gratefully accept your assistance. What do you need from us? Nothing, Commander. Our teams will handle the technical aspects of the evacuation. Your people should focus on keeping everyone calm while we restore basic life support. This will take approximately 6 hours. The human engineering teams that docked with Kepler Station worked with efficiency that amazed the alien observers. They seemed to understand the station's systems better than the aliens who had been trying to repair them for weeks. Within minutes, they had restored emergency power to critical areas. Within an hour, they had stabilized the life support systems that had been failing, but these were not the same humans who had left quietly weeks earlier. These engineers worked with the confidence of people who knew their worth. They provided assistance as equals, offering professional services rather than as subordinates following orders. Similar scenes played out across Council space as human rescue fleets arrived at crisis zones with capabilities that surprised even their former colleagues. The humans had not spent the weeks since their departure sitting idle. They had been building and preparing for exactly this scenario. Park So-min coordinated the massive relief operation from her command center on New Seoul. Reports flooded in from rescue fleets as they encountered the full scope of the disaster that the Council had created for itself. The Purge Protocol had been even more devastating than human analysts had predicted. Status report from all sectors, she requested during the daily coordination meeting. Kepler Station is stable and evacuation is complete, reported the Centauri sector commander. We have relocated the population to temporary facilities on nearby human colonies. Station repairs will take approximately 3 months if they want us to restore full functionality. The Velthari defense grid has been temporarily patched but remains vulnerable, added the defense coordinator. We can provide mobile defense platforms until they decide whether they want us to rebuild their orbital systems. Centauri colony agricultural systems have been restored using portable hydroponic modules, the relief coordinator continued. Crop production will resume within 2 weeks, but long-term sustainability requires permanent installation of human-designed pest management systems. Park So-min noted that every report included conditional language about future assistance. The humans were providing immediate humanitarian aid without hesitation. But longer-term reconstruction would require new agreements based on mutual respect rather than one-sided dependence. The most critical situation was the military crisis where Ravager forces had taken advantage of Council weakness to launch attacks on defenseless colonies. Human fleets had engaged the enemy with devastating effectiveness that demonstrated how much military technology had advanced during the human exile. Admiral J. Wook personally led the defense of the Outer Rim colonies where Ravager forces had expected easy victories. Instead, they encountered human warships that fought with tactical sophistication that had never been seen before. The adaptive AI systems that had failed on Council ships worked flawlessly on human vessels because their creators understood how to maintain them. Enemy fleet is withdrawing from the Epsilon sector, his tactical officer reported. They appear to be retreating to their home systems. Jawook was not surprised. The Ravagers had expected to face the weakened Council fleet with its failing human-designed systems. Instead, they had encountered the full might of human military technology operated by crews who understood every aspect of their equipment. The APAC battle had been brief and decisive, but the humans did not pursue the retreating enemy into their home territory. This was a defensive action designed to protect civilians rather than a war of conquest. The message was clear to all observers. Human military power would be used to defend rather than to dominate. The political implications became clear when Kim Tae-ho returned to Council space for the first time since the human departure. He came not as the junior ambassador who had once begged for equal treatment, but as the representative of an independent power that had proven its capabilities beyond question. Speaker Velthari received him in what remained of the council chambers. The massive building had been damaged by power failures, and many of the alien delegations had been evacuated to safer locations. The symbol of galactic unity was as broken as the civilization it had once represented. Ambassador Kim Tae-ho, the speaker said through a portable translation device that human engineers had provided. "We are grateful for the assistance your people have provided during this crisis." Tae-ho nodded politely, but his expression remained professionally neutral. Speaker Velthari, I am here to discuss the terms under which the human alliance might consider a new relationship with the former council worlds. We are prepared to offer partnership based on mutual benefit and equal representation. The word former carried enormous significance. The humans no longer recognize the council as a legitimate government. In their view, the organization that had excluded them from decision-making had forfeited its authority through catastrophic incompetence. "What are your terms?" the speaker asked with visible reluctance. Tae-ho presented a formal document that outlined the structure of a new galactic alliance, equal representation for all member species, shared decision-making on all major issues, fair compensation for technical expertise regardless of which species provided it, an end to the hierarchical system that had placed some species above others. "These terms are quite different from our previous arrangements," the speaker observed. "Yes, they are," Tae-ho agreed. "The previous arrangements did not work well for humanity, and as recent events have demonstrated, they did not work well for anyone else either. We offer partnership between equals, or we will continue as an independent alliance. The choice is yours." Some alien species embraced the new partnership immediately. Krixtal had been among the first to recognize human capabilities and was eager to join an alliance based on mutual respect. Others struggled with the concept of treating humans as equals after centuries of assumed superiority. The Velthari leadership found the transition most difficult.